Hydropower in Norway is responsible for 99% of electricity generation, so we are almost exclusively renewable electricity generation in Norway.
99% from hydro?
Yes. Norway is excellently set for hydropower, actually, through geographical conditions, because there's a lot of precipitation spread all over the year, and our geographical conditions with high mountains provides high heads, which is very efficient, even if you don't have that much water when you compare to the big rivers in the world. And it's also very well accepted by the population around Norway when they've seen all the benefits hydropower produces, and also the way you distribute benefits to local populations. We like to say that hydropower is the backbone of our prosperity, and this happened 60, 70 years before we even discovered oil. In 1905, Norway became independent from Sweden. Then we broke up this union, and Norway at that time was really poor, one of the poorest countries in Europe. We didn't have much of natural resources or energy resources. We didn't have coal, for instance. So there was a big public debate, that was during First World War, whether Norway should develop hydropower resources, which was domestic, or rely on imported coal, and we found out that we should develop our own natural resources, which was cheap, and it's also part of energy security, because this was time of the First World War. So the politicians didn't want to be dependent on imported fuel. So that was also part of the picture. But if you travel around Norway, you see waterfalls everywhere. So it's quite obvious that we will start developing this resource. When it started, we were dependent on foreign investment, because Norway, as I mentioned, was very poor. We needed foreign capital. But then gradually we become richer, and the state took a big part in development through our state-owned company, which is today called Statkraft. They have become Europe's largest renewable energy producer, by the way. They become international. But the state took a big part in development, even if it was in remote areas. So I think state through financing, and also by creating a very good legal framework with a very sound licensing system. I think that was also very important for the growth of hydropower in Norway.
So it's all federally run for the most part?
Roughly 90% of the hydropower production is owned by the public. It's either, well, about 35% through our state-owned company, but more than 50% is owned by the county municipalities or the local municipalities. So we have a strong tradition of public ownership in Norway, unlike many other countries. So that means that, let's say, local municipalities, they own power companies, they get, of course, all the benefits economically. So hydropower has been very instrumental in developing rural Norway. So if you travel around, you see probably the richest municipalities are in regions where you have a lot of hydropower. There's a wide range of benefits from hydropower. Of course, the most important is that we have a renewable energy, and it's clean, which is becoming more and more important. But there is also a lot of added financial benefits from the local municipalities. It's benefits for creation of fisheries, better improvement of infrastructure, and hydropower with reservoirs is an excellent tool when it comes to controlling floods or droughts, which will maybe become more and more a challenge in the future when you expect change in the climate. And also, of course, for industry development. If you travel along the coast in Norway, you see big aluminium planters. That's started when they got cheap hydropower. So that's also very part of our prosperity, actually.
In terms of just jobs that the hydro industry provides, must be one of the major employers.
It's a big employer in mainland Norway. I don't have the exact figures, but I expect maybe 10,000, 15,000 are directly employed. But even if you have many plants, and the big hydropower sector is very efficient, and most is done by remote control, so you don't have that many employees.
So great jobs during construction. Once the construction is done, not that many required.
No, it's of course maintenance and surveillance, but if you look at our biggest hydropower companies, they have surprisingly few employees compared to what you might have expected.
What were some of the challenges as hydro developed?
Of course, a lot of technical challenges, and we have like 50% of the world's underground stations in Norway, and that's a this rock excavation and tunneling was technical challenges which have been solved very good, but in the later years it's been the environmental challenges because general public has been more aware about environmental impacts, especially like the king of fish in Norway is the salmon.
I see.
So it's a lot of efforts that they are done to take care of the salmon interest also, so we can combine power production with the fisheries. That's, I think, the biggest challenge today that demonstrates sustainability. And we do, of course, hydropower projects differently today than 50 years ago. We've gained a lot of knowledge on how to do it environmentally friendly.
Talk about the initial capital costs versus the maintenance and the cost per kilowatt hour for hydro here in Norway.
Well, hydropower is, in general, a very cheap source of electricity, but you have a very high initial investment cost because of the infrastructure you need as compared to like coal or gas. It's cheaper and quicker to build the plants, but they maybe have a lifespan of 20-25 years. But hydropower often have a lifespan of 70-80 years. And with maintenance, we have plants running for 100 years here. So, but I would say an average cost in Norway would be 3 to 4 US cents. So, but
per kilowatt hour.
Per kilowatt hour, yes. So it's relatively cheap, I think, compared to other sources. Well, when it comes to the hydropower sector in Norway, we have installed about 30,000 megawatt of capacity. It's spread all around the country in more than 600 power plants. They're ranging from the biggest, about 1,250, down to around 5 megawatts, the small hydropower, and an average 100, 200 megawatts, and a 100 megawatt plant that will normally supply about 20,000 households. And the annual generation lays in around a range of about 125 terawatt hours a year. But in a very wet years, like last year, we produced close to 140 terawatt hours. So that's why we have 99% hydropower. It also makes it dependent on the precipitation. In wet years, you get a lot of electricity.
140
terawatt hours.
Terawatt hours. Mm-hmm. Why does Norway use so much hydro?
Well, electricity provides about 50% of the total energy mix in Norway. We use electricity for heating.
Okay.
And that's because it was, we had a big resource, it was cheap, it was clean, so, right. And the infrastructure, so it was kind of encouraged to use electricity for heating. Renewable energy provides more than 60% of the total energy consumption in Norway. And that's compared with the EU 20% targets by 2020, we are quite well above that.
You're in good shape.
We're in good shape, yeah.
So each household consumes on the order of 20,000 kilowatt hours here in Norway. That's about twice the average Western household.
One issue that's close to the high on the governance priorities is actually energy efficiency. Say that the cheapest kilowatt hours is kilowatt hours saved.
Absolutely.
There's quite a lot of potential in that. There will also be many projects when it comes to upgrading and extension of older installations, let's say, because we have quite an old stock from 40-50 years ago, and by changing the electrical equipment, doing some refurbishments, etc., you can gain actually quite a lot of more electricity without new environmental impacts.
How do you see that changing as we go towards plug-in hybrid cars or fully electric vehicles? What are some of the things you see that are going to be challenging for Norway in that future?
Yeah, that could be a good opportunity to use our what's today a surplus of electricity, and it could also be encouraging for new developments in more hydropower, but also like wind power. We have probably the best wind resources in Europe, and that's the intermittent source which would work very well with plug-in hybrids. That's a way of kind of storing this intermittent production.
So do you have wind projects planned on the books?
Oh yeah, there's a few licenses in production. There's a lot under licensing, and a few now got government support, financial support a few weeks ago. So there's a lot of potential there and many interesting projects going on. And we are also working with a legislative framework and for offshore energy. It's mainly floating wind energy platforms, which is a bit in the future, but it's very interesting. We have excellent wind conditions in offshore Norway. There's also a lot of resource and a pilot plant going on when it comes to osmotic power. or salt gradient power. That's also an interesting area in Norway where we have fresh water running into the salty fjords. That areas could also prove interesting.
So how about coal or nuclear? Any of that on the horizon?
Not very foreseeable in Norway now.
So what do you do with all your oil and natural gas resources?
We use maybe a few percent of our oil and we export all of our gas, so that's made us the second largest gas exporter in the world, and we are about number 5 in the world when it comes to oil exports. So that's very good for the economy of that also, when we are energy independent from basically hydropower.
And the revenues from that are then rolled back into?
Mostly into the state pension fund, actually. That's this kind of state, what is called this sovereign wealth fund, which is for future generations.
So energy independence in Norway is secure for
yeah,
a long
I think
time.
we feel very comfortable with the energy security. Yeah,
absolutely. And then working with the region to provide oil and natural gas and even electricity.
Yeah, yeah, we are a major supplier to Europe of natural gas, and of course we sell oil to the world market, and we have also regional integration in the electricity sector through sea cables and interconnectors on land, which helps optimize total energy mix in the region, because we are a little bit different with our Nordic neighbors. Sweden have a lot of nuclear and biomass. Denmark is strong in wind, etc. So with a good cooperation, we can actually optimize this to the benefit of all, and also to the climate, of course. We have about half of the reservoir capacity of Europe, so we like to see ourselves as the battery of Europe. We started the power market in 1991, almost 20 years ago, and established a power pool in 1993, which is one of the first in the world, where you can trade electricity from the various different countries, especially in the Nordic area. And in that way, you kind of optimize price setting for the various energy sources. During nighttime, we can import electricity from neighboring countries, either it's from wind or nuclear, whatever, and then we can kind of save our water, and we can produce during peak time, which is normally during daytime, because hydropower can be switched on and off in a few seconds, unlike other sources.
So if I understand you right, you're saying in terms of renewables, wind and solar and others are intermittent, and hydro is really the peak load, the balancing peak load source that's used in this region.
Yes, that's why we are exporting and importing from Norway, and we are actually stabilizing the grids in, let's say, Denmark and Germany, because they have a lot of intermittent sources like wind and solar power. Good cooperation benefits everybody.
Absolutely.